And now also to elaborate further on Estonian situation and also on the Estonian Defence League, I would like to invite Mr. Jak Aaviksoo, a member of Estonian Parliament and also a former Minister of Defence. Please welcome.
Thank you. Let me first upgrade you a little bit. I used to be a member of parliament. I left back for academia and I'm now the rector of Tallinn Technical University. So I handed over the political power to my younger colleagues in the Conservative Party. I start from a few general statements, and I do believe defense and security matters work best if they've been made as simple as possible. Not superficially simple, but with an understanding. My first statement is that our security depends only on us. Lithuanians, Latvians, and Estonians. We shall never forget that. It doesn't mean that we don't cooperate. We have to. We have to do millions of things. But the very basics is it's our business, first and foremost. If we fail at that, we can't succeed how many friends or supporters we'd have. Secondly, how bad or how good is the situation? Independently of that, we have to keep our heads cold and hearts warm, and never the other way around. It tends to happen sometimes. With that said, I'm telling you that yes, unfortunately, but based on historic experience, Russia is a threat. But Russia can never be only a threat, and we have to know that. We have to do everything possible to reduce that threatening posture, meaning also cooperation where possible. Belarus is unpredictable, but it's our neighbor and stays there. So I think we should learn from what Mr. Howard told us. It's worth rethinking what we can do. Further, with all the recent conflicts worldwide, far or near, there is one characteristic feature, without exceptions. Everywhere, in the Middle East, in Arab countries south of the Mediterranean, in Georgia, Transnistria, Crimea, Donbass, we see, before military intervention, we see instability. Illogical, sometimes, provoked, yes, but stability is also always there. Stability is a representation of ununitedness in national interests, inability to agree and act in a united way. So it's very, very clear that whenever there is an instability, there is a threat, an imminent threat, from whatever source. And we know that everybody, before attacking, tries to destabilize. So we have to do everything possible to avoid instabilities. Stability is built always around a value core. And this value core, in the classical nation-state context, is about national interests. We haven't talked that much about national interests in Europe recently. We have to be open and serious about that. It all goes about national interests. This requires pragmatism, coupled to respect and understanding of the equal interests of our neighbors and friends and partners. Sometimes they coincide, usually they don't coincide. But there's always, just always, a little bit of overlapping, and we have to make use of that possible overlapping. As for Estonia, I'm really happy that we've managed to maintain throughout the last 25 years defense policy that is built upon conscription, territorial defense, 2% of defense spending, and voluntary defense league. It's not true that it hasn't been questioned, that there hasn't been debates, that there hasn't been efforts to, by the way, friendly advice from our partners sometimes. Again, Mr. Howard mentioned a few ill-advised ideas which we happily were able not to implement. There's one important saying recently, which I really like. After the events in Crimea, our Chief of Defense was asked, "What will the Estonians do when you have the green men appearing in Estonia?" "We'll shoot them all." Period. It is not an arrogant posture. It is determination in the will and defense will. And this has to be made clear, because only then it's fair if we tell everybody that that's the way we act and that they know. Only then it's a real deterrence. I equally agree with Mr. Howard that we've been somewhat hesitant in the Western world after the Cold War to speak about deterrence. Deterrence is the key. But in addition to deterrence, there's one more characteristic that I think is vital, fundamental, and that's resilience. The ability to stay together, to react to every external pressure. And this resilience, again, can be built in determination, a will, and preparedness. Of course, we keep saying that the world is not what it used to be after all these events and armed conflicts, terrorist attacks, and so on and so forth. But maybe we've deserved that. Maybe we've lived too long in an illusionary world, trying to believe in things that look nice, but in practice are illusionary. Tension, conflicts of interest are there to stay forever. They will never disappear. The problem is how to handle those risks, how to manage those risks. Illusory understanding that the risks disappear just because we don't like them is a wrong way forward. So I think it's good that security is increasingly becoming an issue everywhere in Europe and further away. It is also important that we start understanding that stability is a value in itself. Our partners do that, feeling instability at home, they are much more prone to understand our concerns. Even if they don't understand it in practical terms, they understand it psychologically. And that's already a long, long step forward. Resilience and deterrence. Resilience and deterrence can never be provided by defense forces alone, however big they are, however big is a country, however rich we are. We need much more. Resilience is a characteristic that can be attributed to a nation, to a country, never simply to armed forces. And this has also been proved in the recent conflicts in very, very different ways. Sometimes we don't like it, sometimes we like it more. It is proved in the Chechen War, in Afghanistan, equally so now in Middle East. We have to learn also from how our opponents react to major force from outside. Even if we don't agree on their values, we may learn from their practices. There is one more thing that I think is increasingly important and has several implications, including on the legal landscape. Most probably, security and defense will be increasingly integrated and have to be increasingly integrated. We still live in legislative environments where there is a wartime and a peacetime. It may sound terrible, but there will never be peacetime as we thought of it 30 years ago or say 20 years ago. Peacetime and wartime is just time, and we have to take care of our security and defense and that of our friends and partners. What it also means is that we have to address all these issues in a comprehensive way. There is no such thing as military defense alone. It doesn't make sense anymore. It has to be developed in a comprehensive way, including different spheres of civil life, different combinations like the Defense League, on one hand a military organization, on the other hand a voluntary organization of armed citizens. But it also has to include sustainability of vital services, and last but not least, psychological defense. Whether we are good at that, no, we are not. And again, maybe we are even better prepared. I mean, here in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, compared to some other Western countries where the professionalization of military defense is so deeply rooted that it's hard to adapt to the modern threats and realities. I think it's a fair question after President Hollande addressed the parliament saying that France is at war. Is Europe at war now? Are we at war together with our French friends? Better say yes than no. You'll be better prepared. In the case of need, we know that the French and the Germans and the Americans and the Poles will stand on our side when needed. From the presentation of General Keeley, you saw that the role of the Estonian Defense League is provide for territorial defense. By saying territorial, I'm not saying it only in geographic terms. There are other territories, functional territories, spheres of activities. This networked concept of the Estonian Defense League is fundamental, and General Keeley was good at explaining how it works with the supporters and enablers and so on and so forth. We need numbers in the case of a possible conflict. Big numbers, tens of thousands in hours' time. And I think that is more or less the only way to offer that capability on one hand and deterrence on the other hand. One more thing, maybe less important in the beginning, but fundamental, I think, in the long run. During the Independence War in 1918, by the way, the Estonian Defense League was formed before the Declaration of Estonian Independence. It was a fundamental public response to this chaos after the First World War. The first volunteers to join the Estonian military, most of them, by the way, former Russian imperial soldiers and officers were schoolboys and students. They were much more numerous than workers and peasants who had their work to do, who had no time to go and fight for freedom. And I do believe this is also true today. And that is why one of the tasks of the Defense League is to be omnipresent in Estonian schools as well as universities. By the way, there are special units in Tallinn and Tartu called academic units, which are mostly manned by students or former students and academics of those institutions. There is where continuity is born. So, ladies and gentlemen, my presentation was titled Estonian Defense League, not only a military capability. I tried to explain to you how the Estonian Defense League responds to these modern demands of hybrid threats and resilience to external threats. But I hope I also managed to say that this is a strong military deterrent equally. And from my consultations and contacts to our Russian friends, if you don't mind, from these contacts I know that they take Estonian Defense League at least as seriously as our regular defense forces. I hope you understand, and I wish you, Lithuania and Latvia, the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aaviksoo, for your presentation. Questions from the audience? You good?
Everything clear?
Everything was very clear. Thank you very much again.